Everybody, good afternoon. Dr. Rob here. Tuesday afternoon, excited to be here. Got a great topic to run through. We're going to be talking about the blood-brain barrier. I've gotten so many requests on the blood-brain barrier, so many questions about what it is, how to treat it, and everything. So, as we go through the blood-brain barrier, if you've had a problem with your brain, you've hit your head, you've had a concussion, you're concerned about a neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or anything like that, just put a B. So the B will be for the brain. The brain is on your mind, no pun intended, and you're concerned and you want to share this information. So do me a favor, share it, comment, like it, and let me know if you will if you've had some concern or a brain injury. Let's talk about the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is interesting in that is a single layer epithelial cell. It's actually made up the same proteins as your gut. That single thin layer epithelial cell actually is the thickness of a wet paper towel. It filters 400 miles of arteries. So obviously the blood-brain barrier is the barrier between the brain and the blood. One of the items that is not protected by the blood-brain barrier is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland has to be in direct contact with blood. So it's very interesting how this is put together. Now, the blood-brain barrier is composed of neurovascular units, including endothelial cells, which actually line the barrier, astrocytic end feet, the end feet which actually support the structure, basement membrane, which actually lines the epithelial cells, and periocytes that provide structural support to blood vessels. To control the blood-brain development and permeability, these periocytes are critical. Blood-brain barrier has taken the world by storm. So many people now are discussing the idea of blood-brain barrier, what it does, and how important it is and how it's hurt. So blood-brain barrier breakdown can be an early biomarker of cognitive dysfunction. In a study in January of 2019 in Nature Medicine, the results were very simply. Individuals with early cognitive dysfunction develop brain capillary damage and a blood-brain breakdown in the hippocampus. Irrespective of amyloid plaque, amyloids are those plaquing that have been attributed to leading down a path of Alzheimer's, or tau biomarker changes, another marker that you see in Alzheimer's. Blood-brain barrier breakdown is an early marker of human cognitive dysfunction independent of amyloid beta and or tau proteins. I love to test, and if you're interested, reach out to me. We test here, we script for blood-brain barrier function and tests. So when we look at it's called, one of the tests that we use is the blood-brain barrier permeability screen, and we're trying to see, is there damage, which proteins have been expressed. So is it blood-brain barrier protein IgG and IgA, or is it blood-brain barrier protein IgM? When you look at these proteins and what's going on, you can determine if the blood-brain barrier is in functionally good health, if there was a recent onset blood-brain barrier damage, or there's ongoing blood-brain barrier damage. So you may want to differentiate between the three. So when you look at sports-related repetitive head injuries, like a concussion, like a TBI, repeated subconcussions or concussions actually can disrupt the blood-brain barrier. So when you disrupt the blood-brain barrier, you're opening the door to the brain. I think the blood-brain barrier is not just a door to the brain. I think it's the gatekeeper to the brain. Entry of unwanted molecules or cells into the brain then follow. There's an attack on what we call microglial astrocytes, oligodendocytes, and neurons. They're attacking specific structures inside the brain once you have like a concussion or damage to the brain. The production of antibodies then start against neural cell antigens, ultimately leading, because of a concussion and damage to the blood-brain barrier, of neuroautoimmunity and leading to neurodegeneration. Let me make one point crystal clear. When you damage your gut, things pass your gut, they go into your bloodstream, you have your immune system to attack it. You may be able to ameliorate it. When something passes your blood-brain barrier, there's no place to go but inside your brain, and it's a bad day for everybody involved. So what you really want to look at and understand is the idea of the blood-brain barrier is structured once again very much like the gut, in that there's tight junctions. If the tight junctions are together and they're not what I like to refer to as loose junctions, even if you have autoreactive antibodies and they're not released, they're not going to damage astrocytes and they're not going to damage neurons. However, if you have autoreactive antibodies, they are going to damage your astrocytes. Even more so than that, they could, if you have a lot of autoreactive antibodies and your tight junctions are open, they can do a lot of damage, excessive damage, and you may have neuronal cell death. So the tight junctions, or if you will, the junctions in the blood-brain barrier are critical. They must be pristine in working order not to have any damage inside your brain. So TBI, concussion, factors that can in fact impact the blood-brain barrier. So post-concussion, or what I like to refer to as the leaky blood-brain barrier or leaky brain. There's a leaky gut, there's a leaky brain. Leaky blood-brain barrier will allow neurotoxins into the brain, increasing damage from brain injury. The leaky blood-brain barrier will not transport nutrients efficiently for brain tissue repair. Problem compounded if there's also a leaky or excessively permeable intestine. So if you have a leaky brain, it's bad. If you have a leaky gut, that's also bad in combination, because whatever your gut does, your brain does, because of the bidirectionality. So you'll get a secondary attack if your gut is also permeable on your brain. The microbiome changes after concussion or TBI. Microbiome and bacterial endotoxins, an endotoxin like lipopolysaccharide or LPS, can also damage your brain. Blood-brain barrier damage occurs with even mild head trauma. You don't have to have a concussion. You don't have to have a loss of consciousness. All you have to do is have some minor trauma. It can damage your blood-brain barrier. It can be what I like to refer to as a cumulative effect. If you damage your blood-brain barrier, you may have chronic brain inflammation. Brain cells, including these microglials, which are your macrophages of your central nervous system, can produce TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and interleukin-6, all inflammatory markers. Inflammation continues to damage the brain cells even after the blood-brain barrier is open. Brain injury and disruption of the blood-brain barrier can lead to chronic ongoing brain inflammation and ongoing brain damage from leaky blood-brain barrier. Here is your caveat. Here is your takeaway, the gem, if you will. If you take care of patients with a head injury, you must assess and treat the blood-brain barrier. So when you look at the blood-brain barrier or blood-brain barrier breach, you can get it from traumatic brain injury, you can get it from physical and emotional stress, exposure to oral and nasal antigens, migration into the brain through the nasal passageways. Also, specific environmental factors can damage your blood-brain barrier. This ultimately leads to a depletion of growth factors, microglial activation, damage and leading to neurotoxicity, which leads to decrease in neuroplasticity, ultimately getting neurodegenerative disease in your brain. So to repair the blood-brain barrier, what do? Well, there's a few things I like to do. The modalities that I look to and that I use all the time, that I pull out of my armamentarium, is low-level laser. Low-level laser is really shown to have a positive effect on brain. The microenvironment really increases in that there's a decrease in anti-inflammation. But I want to talk about lifestyle mostly. I want to talk about foods. So number one, avoid gluten. Gluten means glue. Let's not talk about what gluten does to your gut. What does gluten do to your brain? It's damaging to your brain. So let's avoid gluten. Let's avoid dairy. Do you know in my book, I put in as an example, my upcoming book, one of the milk proteins can damage the cerebellum. So what you want to do is you want to avoid gluten, you will want to avoid dairy, and you want to avoid sugar. You want to fix the gut. You want to adhere to my 7R action step program. You want to use probiotics. Now we're getting into specifics for the blood-brain barrier. You want to use probiotics like that Lactobacillus acidophilus, Bifidobacterium lactis. You want to do a heavy metal detoxification to allow the cell membrane in the blood-brain barrier to heal. Get some sleep. That's when your brain detoxes. You want to add specific nutrients like acetyl L-carnitine, alpha-lipoic acid, berberine, and curcumin. You also want to add vitamin D3, sulforaphane, omega-3 fatty acids, resveratrol, and, without question, pro-resolving mediators. Melatonin, believe it or not, everybody talks about melatonin just as a sleep agent. It actually stabilizes the blood-brain barrier and prevents damage caused by TBI. You want to also avoid environmental mold and microtoxins. Microtoxins reduce the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. They cause neurological damage, and they increase the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. Add some B vitamins. B vitamins support the blood-brain barrier, help heal leaky brain. So I wanted some brevity in this particular Facebook Live. I know a lot of people were saying, hey, we're back at work. We need a 10 or a 15-minute hit. I'm going to try and give a couple of 10 or 15-minute hits. I think I saw a question up here. And, I see all my notifications. And great question. They want to know, can we reach out to you to talk about the brain? Absolutely. What I'll do is, anybody who has any interest, just DM me and we can talk about any kind of brain thing that you want to talk about. Some people don't want to put it up on my reel. I know everybody's busy. I hope everybody has a great day. Take care of your brain. It's your main organ in your body. We can't live without it. Remember, your brain is only 3 pounds and made of the consistency of Jell-O. Something for everybody to ponder. Hope to speak to everybody soon. Dr. Rob, always yours in health.